Oh, that is the wrong class. Okay. Oh, we are in chapter 2 now, which I tend to get bogged down in because there's a lot of Greece. A lot going on in Greece. um, so we'll see how long it takes us to get through this. Now, granted, this was also um, back when I was like making these in the middle of the night, and was just trying to just get as much down as I could so that I wouldn't run out of material in the middle of class and then I have no idea what I was supposed to do next. So some of this we're just going to kind of skip through because it's not on the test and not worry about it. Because I'm a little more streamlined today, but I haven't quite gone back and edited my stuff yet. Also, doesn't really count for you, but for my online portion of the class, I'm still getting used to Blackboard having changed on me because it's been the same like since I was in school, and then they changed on us over the summer, or well, really not even over the summer. They changed on us like the last couple of weeks of last semester, and it was a nightmare. Um, but one of the things apparently that has changed is if I put stuff up on Blackboard for you guys, by default it is hidden from students. And some of the stuff, that option is like when you're uploading it and you have to put like the name in and what the stuff is and yada yada yada. There's like a drop down bar and you can go ahead and set it from hidden from students to students can see it. And for other stuff, you have to put it up there first and then go down to it and make it visible. And I didn't realize that when I was putting up the discussion days last week. So it wasn't until literally, I think Monday, that the discussion day for last week went up for this class and one of my other 101 classes. But that's okay because, well, for one, like the discussion days are up to me anyway, so whatever. I would just say that that would count it for this week anyway. But also, I only count discussion days for weeks that are full weeks, and since we had Monday off, we don't have a discussion day this week. So last week counts for this week too. So if you haven't, well, obviously you didn't respond to the discussion day last week because it wasn't up, or it wasn't visible. It was up, it just you couldn't see it. Yeah, you have plenty of time. I had a student email me, and she was like, I can't seem to find the discussion day. I was like, well, it's up there, and I went and looked, and it had the little eye with the cross to it. I said, oh, son of a... Great, thank you, Blackboard. That's so helpful. So, FYI, in case anybody was wondering what the hell I was talking about discussion day last week, it was up there all weekend. You guys just didn't have access to it. Again, the few of you that do physically come in here for class, you don't have to worry about discussion day. You're physically here in class. Or at least you're supposed to be. You know who you are. Please make sure you come to class. Anyway, I mean, unless you're switching on to the online part, but let me know. Email me or something. Anyway, any questions? We're getting into Greece. Okay, cool. The chapter, the name of this chapter is Mini Greases. The spell check does not like that. Greases is not a proper word. Now, I get it. As we're going to see in this chapter, Greece as a single entity didn't really exist until like the 1800s, almost early 1900s. I mean, it sort of did because it was part of the Ottoman Empire, but like as modern day Greece, it didn't really exist. And ancient Greece was a region, less so a culture, and very much so not a people, because each city-state was its own thing. Um, they very much shared a lot of stuff, but they were very, very competitive with one another and went to war a lot. So they very much were not working together. Anyway, so Herodotus was known as the father of history, but also the father of lies, which is to say, not really either. This is something I was actually talking about with my American history class just a little bit ago. When explorers would go out and, well, explore, they would embellish what they saw. And that's not to say they were lying, they were just making their stories more entertaining. And that's how things were back in the day. When you went to a new land that people back home had never seen before, it was sort of expected that you would exaggerate things to make it more entertaining. So Herodotus, who did explore, and I mean by explore I mean just kind of like around the Mediterranean and northern Africa, tells strange foreign customs and would embellish them to make things more interesting. Oh, these people breathe fire, and they would eat each other, and all sorts of stuff. Also, as we get a bit further on, he championed Greek unity and Polish independence against the Persian Empire, even as the Polish were preparing to fight each other. I'll get to what all that means in a minute. Was also against unbridled imperialism, which is to say Athens, but was largely ignored. So Herodotus is a pretty big name among historians, just as like an early example of someone who kept a lot of records, even if they were somewhat embellished. But he is important in that regard. So there he is in Austria. And he had some. I've got a bunch of quotes from these guys that they're famous for. And again, it's been a long time since these guys were around, so take a lot of these quotes with a grain of salt. Some of them may be misapplied quotes. Some of these may be made up entirely. These are just what I found and thought they sounded nice, so I just stuck them up here. In peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons. So this is Herodotus essentially trying to push the Greeks against constant war. Call no man happy until he is dead. Yeah, I get that one, Herodotus. So, going back, now Herodotus existed towards the end of the timeline we're going to talk about. The chapter opens with Herodotus, and I just started writing with Herodotus. I really shouldn't have started the actual notes until this part. because like chronologically it starts here. Again, Herodotus is still important, but anyway. Um, so the Greek Dark Ages, about 1100 to 800 BCE. The reason it's called the Dark Ages is we don't have much written record of what was going on in that period. Um, there's not even like pottery or uh, building ruins left from that era. Um, this was after the Mycenaean Age, which we talked about previously. Um, cities were destroyed, people scattered, and things were just kind of left. And we don't really know what happened. Um, it's just like this weird several hundred years of nothing. Um, Eventually, people began resettling the cities. Uh, Trade was weak. They could no longer sustain their war economy like they had before. So the communities began isolating themselves, and this began to create what we will begin to see in this chapter of the very independent, fiercely independent Greek polis. I thought I had a separate. This is probably going to be in the next slide, but I'll just go ahead and mention it here. Polis, Polis, is singular. Polis is plural. That just means a Greek city-state. So when I say that, that's just city-state. Which, again, in case I wasn't clear about it before, oh God, I hope I hit start on the. Okay, it's like I hope I'm streaming. Let me make sure that happens way more often than I'd like. Okay, looks like we're streaming. Which is to say it happens at all. And if you need a reminder, city-states from, back with the Mesopotamians, each city is its own separate political entity. It does its own thing. It might as well be a whole separate country. The only thing they share is that they more or less all speak Greek. They have some similar culture to them, but for the most part, they're pretty much separate and oftentimes opposed to one another. Some of the pottery we do have from this time, I remember I took an art history class with Dr. Howell over at Francis Marion, and there was this whole specific thing with like the early Greek art was this, which is the they would basically pour the glaze on the pottery, and then they would essentially scrape the part off that they were gonna. That's the lighter part here, and then later on they do the opposite, where the glaze is the part that's the art, as opposed to the absence of it. It's a whole thing. I just wanted to include that. So we eventually get the Iron Age in Greece. By about 1000 BCE, iron is largely used in mainland Greece. And now iron's important, which means iron is now an economic venture. uh, locate and mine iron to make money because everybody's using iron. But because of this Greek isolationism, um, each polis would protect its own deposit of iron rather than circulate the iron through trade. So when they would find iron, they would mine it out and make their tools, and they would protect their iron mines rather than mine it out and trade iron for stuff that they might need. Which, again, isolationist. Um, Part of that was due to, as we've said, because after the Mycenaean age, everything had just really gone downhill. Um, Farms only really could produce enough for individual families, so they didn't have extra to trade. Um, there were no larger governments, so people were really just like fighting each other to survive. We had these blood feuds among families, which, if you don't know what a blood feud is, um, that's especially bad. That's where, if one of the people from your family gets killed by someone from another family, it is now your sworn duty to kill that person or just someone from that person's family. Um, but when you do that, then they are now sworn and duty bound to kill someone from your family, but that in turn just causes a cycle until everybody's dead on both sides, essentially, or until one side runs out of people. Um, that's not a good way to run a society. Everybody ends up dying. Why isn't it working there? Okay. Now this is later Greek. I mean, this based on the locale. This is probably the last stand of the Spartans, or supposed to be the last stand of the Spartans. So that's much later. In fact, in the era we're talking about, Sparta didn't exist. Sparta came much later than the rest of the cities. So we'll get to that later as well. All right. So, typically, these polis were these families that gathered together in defensive villages, typically on hilltops, that they then walled off from the outside. So, and we're actually going to see patterns of this later on in history. When society collapses, you get a few people that come together, they find a hilltop, and they throw rocks at other people that come by. Just to put it simply. You find a place that you can defend, and then you defend it from anybody else, even if the other people might not be a threat, but then now you look like a threat to those other people, so then they get a bunch of people and go to their hilltop and build a fort and throw rocks at you, and now everybody's mad at everybody else. And then once your little hilltop forts become big cities, you've been at war with this other city for as long as anybody can remember. So, these polis were made of a hill or a high spot known as Acropolis. Again, just throw together some Greek words. Acro means high, like an acrobat. Polis, again, is city, so the high part of a city is the Acropolis. There you go. Marketplace is agora. The word agoraphobia is the fear of being out in wide open spaces. The marketplace was the agora because it was the big wide open space. Typically, these cities were run. Whoops, sorry about that, online folks. I just smacked the mic. Um, the cities were typically run by aristocrats or elites who held land, which, you know, is going to be how it goes for a long time. Um, and only men who held land could actually be considered citizens, which is going to be an issue a little later on, but we'll get to that. That said, due to the Greeks being isolationist, um, and since they weren't working together to form a stronger, cohesive whole, and therefore had a weak economic system and were not part of the larger Mediterranean trade, um, when the Assyrians and Phoenicians came to blows and had this huge war during this time period, they were ignored. They didn't even I was going to say they didn't even know the Greeks were there. They probably knew the Greeks were there, but it would be like two armies fighting, and there was like a kid in a there was like two children playing in a sandbox or something, and it's like, okay, well, they're not in the slightest are concerned. Um, so yeah, Greece was completely ignored um, by Assyria and Phoenicia, which was good for them because Greece would have very much been absorbed by either power if they had felt like it. Now, Assyria did eventually overtake Phoenicia, but Carthage, which, as I showed you guys on the map last time, um, despite being a colony of Phoenicia, was powerful enough that it had its own trade empire by then and just began doing its own thing. And it had such a large Mediterranean trade that it helped to pull Greece from its economic depression just by trading with whatever Greek city-states were by the ocean, which most were because that's just advantageous. Here is a really simplistic, this feels like something I would have seen in one of my children books that I had as a kid. I had a lot of these nerdy ass children books. Except it would have had a cutaway of what would have been in the buildings and all sorts of stuff. I had a lot of these were, man, I miss that stuff. Anyway, this is your typical polis. You've got the Acropolis up here at the top, where typically the temple was, and major important. Usually the political buildings would be up here too. So the stuff the important stuff was up here, and then down here was the marketplace, and where some of the was still important people lived because you were inside the city walls. But, less important. Still nobility would live. But then also the marketplace where all the money was handled. And then beyond the walls, we'll talk about this later, but this is the countryside, which is still considered part of the polis's land, and the people that lived in these outside farms were considered part of the polis as long as they owned that land. And then, of course, it was important that they have access to the water because that's the heart of trade. All right. We can't talk about Greece without talking about Homer, especially due to Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Um, Actually, I think I talked about this last time, but I'll talk about it again here. So he was credited with writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. We believe he lived sometime between 850 and 600 BCE, but we aren't entirely sure. We don't know a lot about him. We mostly know about him through these writings, and he didn't. He supposedly didn't write these down. He was supposedly blind and orated the poems, and someone else wrote them down, and then they stuck around, and that's why we even know this dude existed. Um, and the reason he's so important, besides the fact that like these stories are still pretty famous today, um, is in particular the Iliad is about the Trojan War, is about the heroes of the Mycenaean Age. And it's one of the few accounts, it's one of the few one of the few examples of cultural activity we have during the Greek Dark Ages, even if it was looking back of the good old days of the Mycenaean Age, of the Trojan War. So there was stuff happening in the Greek Dark Ages, even if we don't have a ton of evidence of it anymore. But again, one of the most famous Greek figures in history lived during that period, so we can't completely write it off. And I know I mentioned this last time. Initially, the Iliad was thought to be completely fiction until a German archaeologist was like, why don't we check and see and go to where he says Troy is and start digging around. And then they found the ruins of a city that matched Troy, and it was pretty cool. I didn't know that. I thought it was I figured they knew it all along, but being in the future now, we know Troy's a thing. But anyway, I figured I'd just throw this in there. Yeah, there's Homer, and he typically had someone with him to guide him from place to place and keep him from getting eaten by not even a wild dog. This one's got a collar on. This dog just doesn't like wandering blind men, I guess. The kid's got a rock in his hand to throw at the dog, I guess. And then, of course, another depiction of the Trojan horse. This one also doesn't feel too accurate because that is not a big horse to fit a bunch of dudes in. That doesn't feel right to me. All right. Speaking of Homer, another reason why he's very important is the Greek alphabet? Question mark. It was adapted from Phoenician writing, which we mentioned was adapted from Linear AB. So there's this evolution of languages. As we mentioned, Phoenician writing didn't have vowels, and the Greek alphabet, quote, invented vowels so that you could read literature the way it was meant to sound. Again, with Phoenician, a lot of it was context, because like we said last time, if you see READ, it could be read or read depending on the context. Thank you, lights. And so I feel like that's what a lot of the Phoenician stuff was. It's how can you have words without vowels? Well, the context. However, with the Greek alphabet putting vowels in, it was just easier. In fact, I want to say Hebrew was the same way. It didn't have vowels initially, and then like they went back and added vowels, but with the old text that didn't have vowels, they would like put dashes and stuff where vowels would be, so it would be easier to go back and read, because Hebrew is such an old language. Now again, like with technology, language sure as heck doesn't catch on immediately. It's not like, again, I'm imagining any kind of grand strategy game where it's like, you've now unlocked, gunpowder, and now all your troops have access to guns. That's not how it works. You discover iron, and it's going to take you decades, sometimes centuries, for it to spread throughout a region. Sometimes, as we saw, like the Hittites had it at this point, and it took like 1,000 years for everyone else to get their hands on it. With a language, obviously some people are going to resist it, and they're going to be like, oh, well, I want to use this old thing. It took a long time. However, the fact that we have a lot of Greek writing today, including many of Homer's poems, shows that ancient Greek became popular eventually and was widely used, and we have examples of it all over Greece. And that's why why we know Homer was ever a guy, if he was ever a guy. It's weird that, like, we have the same level of uncertainty about a guy that lived, 2,000 plus years ago as we do about William freaking Shakespeare that was just like a few hundred years ago. It's like, I feel like we should know about Shakespeare. Like, was he a dude? Was he a couple of dudes? Who knows? Like, we weren't sure if Homer even existed, man. What the hell? Anyway, whatever. Point being, the reason why one of the reasons why the Greek alphabet spread the way that it did is that Homer's poems were written in it. And the reason why Homer's poems spread like they did is because the Iliad was about the Mycenaean age, and it was this Greek heroic past that everyone could identify with. Again, all the Greeks, all these polis were different, and they, often hated each other. They were rivals and whatnot, but they all could identify with the Mycenaean age. They were all Mycenaeans at some point. It's like, I guess you'd say like Americans with the Revolutionary War. Most Americans can agree on that part at least. You didn't have too many. You don't have too many Americans today that are like, oh, we should have been loyalists. It's like, no, we're all right. Granted, Canada's fine, so I don't know. Maybe we should have. But anyway, yeah. So here's some of the way the letters changed over time. You've got the Proto-Canaanite letters, the early Phoenician, and then eventually the Greek. You can see how some of them make sense. Some of them I don't see the change, or I don't see how that became that. Some Greek letters I definitely don't recognize. I don't know what this is. I don't know what the lollipop is. Now, granted, it's got some asterisks next to it, so there is context somewhere, but it's not on this little piece of paper, so, or this little thing I pulled up. So whatever. Anyway, and even though we don't necessarily use Greek today, like at least here in America, beyond honor societies and whatnot, it was used by the Latins, the Romans, to evolve their language, and the Latin language is the root of the Romance languages, one of which is French, and French is one of the two languages, French and, the Germanic branch, that created English. So, in a roundabout way, this is one of the roots that created the language we have today. So, it's there. Okay, so getting to the end of the Greek Dark Ages. Greek culture, government, religion, and economy began to revitalize. So things started getting better, which is good for pretty much everybody. It's nice when you can, survive. Still, though, there was obviously plenty of tension. Those who had power wanted more power, and those without power, which is to say most people, chafed under the system and wanted change. So there are various ways to relieve this tension without, rising up and murdering everybody. So there's the Olympic Games, the increased importance of religious authority, and tyrants, which I guess the last part was kind of rising up and murdering everybody, but we'll get to that in a minute. All right. Okay, so here's the map we're going to be looking at going forward. You've got, well, really, let's see. This is considered mainland Greece at this point. All this up here is tribal land, including where Sparta would eventually. In fact, Sparta was down here. It wasn't even considered tribal land yet. It wasn't anything yet. So it's right here, Attica, where Athens is, Corinth, Argos. Yeah, Argos was there. And then we had some regions over here, Lydia and Ionia. This region on the western coast of modern day Turkey, and then Crete, of course, too. So Greece was more these islands than it was like this landmass like it is today. But when we talk about, quote, mainland Greece, we're talking about like this little section. So, the Olympic Games. This is the first actual 100% fixed date we have in Greek history. And I'm pretty sure I don't have that on the test. I do have a date later for you guys. But this one I don't worry about. But it is 776 BCE, and everything else so far has been like time periods of some between this and that. This is an actual date that they have for us. So 776 BCE, this was a Pan-Hellenic festival. Pan-Hellenic means all Greek. Hellenic means Greek. Pan is just like all Greek. festival at Olympia, which was down in southern Greece, or Peloponnesus, which is the landmass that Sparta would eventually be on. So it was down in that region. So of course it was there to honor the gods, in particular Zeus, because Zeus was, the main god. Obviously, if you're gonna honor the gods at some kind of big festival, it might as well be the top dog. It was every 4 years where they'd come and have athletes compete. They'd represent their polis, and this was a good way for polis to compete with each other without going to war. And, at a time when, going to war meant, having a sword and maybe a shield, and, if you were rich, some bracers and, shin guards for armor. I feel like having an athletic competition every 4 years would be a really good alternative. Because, this wasn't this was a very personal type of warfare. So this combined the idea of individual excellence, known as arete, and the belief that life was a constant struggle or competition, known as agon, which are two Greek terms that would be very easy for me to put on a test. So, hint, hint. And I'm just getting constant emails today? What the hell? Leave me alone. Anyway. And another. Gmail. Leave me alone. Alright. I believe this is the first Olympics that was held after Greece was independent. So this is before World War I believe. So it was late 1800s, early 1900s. This is one of the I can't remember the name of the Hippodrome. I think Hippodrome's right. I don't think that's Hippodrome, because hippo is I don't think that's Latin. Hippo means horse. Hippopotamus means water horse. So freaking weird. Anyway, this was the horse racetrack. Anyway, this was them reopening or restarting the Olympic Games after Greece finally won its independence. So, the Greeks could come together with their shared culture and religion at the Olympic Games, because hey, we can all agree to do some sports or whatever. That's fine. The Oracle of Delphi, which was dedicated to the god Apollo, and if you're not familiar with Apollo, a lot of the gods are multitaskers, but one of Apollo's things was prophecy, if I remember right, foresight. And Oracle of Delphi, who was dedicated to the god Apollo, was supposed to be able to access some of his power and be able to help people with their issues. Excuse me. So they would come together and settle disputes through the Oracle. Now, this wasn't what you might be thinking, where it's like, hey, we're arguing over who gets this land or something. what does Apollo say, or what do the gods think? Um, it was typically not that. It was, hey, so and so invaded my land, and so is right there with you. Um, or you just say, hey, I invaded this guy's land, and again, that guy's right there with you. Um, are the gods cool with that? Because the guy right here, he's kind of pissed. I took his land. Um, I took his grazing land, and now my sheep are on his land. Um, but the gods are all about taking shit. So are they cool with that, or they want me to give it back? And um, the oracle would, you know, pour this incense into this thing and get high as fuck and um, start speaking in voices, and usually the gods were cool with whatever people got up to, based on what I've read. So it was one of those. It feels like where the saying "it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission" came from, because that was very much how they used the Oracle of Delphi. It was, hey, I already did this thing. Are the gods cool with it or not? As opposed to, I want to do this thing. Is that okay with the gods? So it was very much a hindsight situation. Before we get to the tyrants, the book mentions immigration. Um, so there was enough stability in the economy that Greeks began setting up settlements across the Mediterranean, which I showed you guys in that previous map, like along the coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. These weren't what we consider modern-day colonies, or even, colonies from, well, modern-day exists hundreds of years ago. So, yeah, like how the English would do, or the French would do, or the Spanish would do. The Greeks called them homes away from home. I'm sure there was a Greek term, but the book doesn't give it. That's just what they call it. Basically, what they would do, they would leave for various reasons. They want more pasture land, political pressure, economic incentives, any reason that people would move to another place. They would build cities that were similar to the cities they left. They would control the hinterlands. They would kill the men and enslave the women, because of course they would. And they would often carry traditions from the cities that they left from, but they were not politically, tied to whatever city they left from. So, like, if a bunch of Athenians, I'll go ahead and pull this map up. If a bunch of Athenians, where are we at? So Athens is here. If a bunch of Athenians went over here and settled down, this is not now an extension of Athens. This is not now, New Athens or part of the Athenian Empire. Well, we'll get to the Athenian Empire later. But, like, this is just a bunch of dudes who happen to be Athenian, who have now set up a new city that might have some, like, Athenian traditions, because that's just what they're used to. But it's now whatever the city is that they called it, and since it's a city-state, it is its own legal nation. It's not part of Athens anymore. That's how that worked. So while they did spread, and this image wouldn't work if they were like, each city said its own separate thing, so it'd just be polka dots all over the place. This blue shows, the Greek, for God's sake, the Greek spread like it's a single monoculture. It was not. That's just like the Greek people, I guess, spreading all around even the Black Sea up here, which is kind of crazy. Um, and then Italy, which we'll get into that later as well. Um, but yeah, so there were Greeks all over the place, not just, well, here in Greece. This becomes a problem later. We'll get to that as well. And there's Phoenicia before they got squashed. Hesiod. I think I took him off the test, but yeah, we'll get through him real quick. Talk about sufferings of the common man for this poem's theogony, with the Greek gods, works and days, with farming, complained about corruption, which there was a lot of it. He believed that most of the land was held by a few people, and the polis were more aggressive towards one another. He basically just believed that things were not going the way they should, and that if things didn't change, it was about to get bad. Which, yeah, he wasn't wrong. The book has quite a bit to say on Hesiod, but I don't want to get too much into it. Bad neighbors as great a calamity as a good one is a great advantage. Gossip is mischievous, light and easy to raise, but grievous to bear and hard to get rid of. No gossip ever dies away entirely. If many people voice it, it too is a kind of divinity. So I guess don't talk crap. And then there's this one, Hesiod. Whoever has trusted a woman has trusted deceivers. Okay, Hesiod had a bad experience, I guess. Alright, so let's get to the tyrants thing. This is another example of an ancient term an ancient term that we still use today, that the meaning has changed quite a bit. From its original use. Now, I mean, the original definition is the same, but the context is different. Tyrants, autocrats who seize power by force. Okay, sure. However, in the days of archaic Greece, it was often seen as a good thing. Because oftentimes the polis would be mired in conflict. There would be two feuding families that were often on the verge of completely wiping the polis out in the course of trying to take over the city. And the tyrant would come in and basically have a more powerful military, put both families down, and create a more stable government for the polis. So while this was like a forced military takeover, they were a better solution than what was going on. And they rarely had successors. They were charismatic. They typically weren't long-lasting. They'd just come in, fix whatever the problem was, and then would lead to a different, usually better form of government. Which, as we'll see with the Romans, similar to how the Romans used dictators as like the stopgap measure of, we need immediate change, we'll put someone in charge, give him all the power temporarily, have that change happen, and then we'll move on as things were. That's what tyrants were. Tyrants were in ancient Greece. Is like things are going bad. The city's going to burn down. This guy comes in, forces change, um, and then everyone carries on. A lot of times the polis would have, or polis, would have entrenched aristocratic rule, which again is usually just people trying to enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. And then you would have other aristocrats who would be fighting them to enrich themselves, and everybody else is just suffering. So the tyrants would come in and kick both the guys out, which is to say both their families typically, and then help set up something new. Not necessarily, and I know like the thought is, oh, then they set up a democracy. No. There was only like one, quote, democracy, and that was Athens, and that was not even really a democracy in the modern sense, but we'll get to that. All right. Let's do just a little more. All right. So each polis had its own form of government, which very much was shaped into the way that it was by the end of the Dark Age. So a polis was three things. Now we talked about like what it was physically, but that's just there. So the physical place that was there was part of what a polis was. And then also the territory, so the city and the outlying lands, which I showed you guys on that image. And then finally the politics of the polis. Because you can't just have a physical place and call that a city. You have to have the politics running it. So, some polis, such as Athens, Kos, and Naxos, did allow for some degree of commoner assemblies. Now, again, these were not true democracies. They just would let the commoners come in a crowd and voice their complaints, which did mean that they were able to voice their complaints as opposed to just being silenced. And, well, if you silence people long enough, they start getting loud, and that tends to turn violent. This gradually led to the demos. Demos in Greek being the masses or the people. These were free male native residents of a polis. They were not nobles, but had some form of standing or wealth, which is to say commoners, but not the poor, which again is something that even when we get to American history is something that they specify when it's whether they're allowed to vote or not. But that's where we get democracy from, is rule by the people, allegedly. But who the people are is very specific. You have to be a man. You have to be free, so you can't be a slave, obviously. You have to be a resident of the polis. Well, that depends on a lot of things, too. Non-noble is just, because if you're a noble, you're already, considered, you already vote. But you have to have some level of wealth. You have to have some amount of land. You can't be just like a contractual farmer that goes from place to place and works, and you don't really live anywhere. And the reason this came about was the phalanx. The phalanx is a basic fighting unit of most polis. We've probably all seen what a phalanx looks like. If not, don't worry about it. I've got a picture. and the individual infantry fighting in a phalanx is the hoplite. And the reason this is important, besides the fact that, I don't know, I think it's cool, is that if you are sending people to war, they have to have a say in the government. That's why the voting age was dropped down to 18 from 21 during the Vietnam War, because if we were sending 18-year-olds to go and die in the jungle for whatever freaking reason we had, then they should be able to vote on who is sending them to go and die in the jungle. So that's the same argument they had here, is if we're sending these guys out to stab each other for us getting more wealth, they need to be able to have some voice in politics, otherwise they're going to come stab us. Also, prior to this, most combat was either one-on-one or like from horseback, but not the sort of thing you might be thinking with like medieval horseback, because they didn't have stirrups, so it was really easy to get knocked off your horse. So any kind of horseback stuff was like with a bow, or some like lighter weapon. A horse ain't gonna do much against this. This is a phalanx. Now this is the Macedonian phalanx, so it's more advanced than what these guys would be having originally. But you can see, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys deep. Their spears are all the way out in front of the first guy, and they've all got shields. And then everyone behind them all also have their spears. So once they hunker down with their shields, that's a spiky boy. You don't want to run straight into that. And for horses, you just plant the back of that spear in the ground and you let the earth do the holding. And as I recently saw on YouTube, I think the guy was playing War Thunder. The earth has a perfect kill-death ratio. No one has ever survived a 1v1 with the earth. So yeah, it's a really good simple formation, and they could do like shield walls when the other guys are using arrows. But again, like you make a shield wall, and they're like, okay, well, we'll just run infantry or run cavalry. You can't run cavalry when they got the spears out. All right. We will talk about the economics and other stuff next time, and then we'll get into the Persian Wars, which are very important in the shifting of Greece to closer to what we see in the modern day. We'll do that on Monday. So I'll see y'all then.